morning, everyone, from wherever you're listening to this podcast, from anywhere around the world. This is the Innovation Law Club Africa Fireside Chats. And we have today with us Neil Preez, the founder of MellowVans, a South African light electricity utility vehicle company. He's passionate about urban transports, and I look forward to having the conversation with him. I am Tola Onayemi. I'm an international trade and investment lawyer. I negotiated the African Continental Free Trade Agreement on behalf of the continent. Also did some work on advising tech startups on raising capital around the continent. So I look forward to these conversations with Neil, just because I read his bio and he does so many interesting things. Neil, do you just want to tell us quickly about yourself?
Yes, firstly, Tola, good morning. Thanks for having me. Really appreciate it. Good morning to the listeners as well. I think just to give you a bit of background, I'm a 40-year-old South African based in Stellenbosch, which is just north of Cape Town. Been working on the MellowVans project for a couple of years. We're happy to say that it's now eventually moving from a startup phase into a commercialization phase. We've managed to build an MVP in the market, and we're actually creating some revenue, which is a fantastic thing. And it's a brilliant feeling as an entrepreneur to actually write your first couple of invoices.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for that. Now, so, you have one of the most interesting bios that I've read, right? From marrying on a beach in Thailand to the several tough mountain trails, to living in several countries around the world. I love your heart view to the world. But my question is, you were already a successful entrepreneur and business person. You had co-founded and operated a number of businesses in the transport, retail, and chemical sector. What really drove you to start MellowVans? And what has been the journey so far? Just give us a glimpse into that. Yeah.
Absolutely, Daria. I think that's a super relevant question. I was lucky enough to be in China, in the south of China, when Apple and Foxconn and PCH were developing the first iPhone back in 2006, 2007. And through that, luckily, I got exposed to some of the engineers working on the project. And I think just the general business vibe, both from on the Chinese side and expats building things in China, was just phenomenal at that stage. And I think having that exposure and seeing how brilliant products like the iPhone was being developed was really inspiring. And that set the stage for me to kind of move away from traditional chemistry and chemical type industries to looking at hardware and production and entrepreneurship and how that could be combined with what we know in South Africa and what we've been doing as a nation for many years in automotive and in transport. And also in saying that being fully aware of the shortcomings that we as an African nation had in terms of transport and mobility, but also the opportunities, obviously, as a South African is massive.
Fantastic. So MellowVans, your company and yourself have been recognized locally and internationally for a number of things you've done, right? How do you see your company evolving in the next coming years, right? Do you plan to expand across Africa? If you're planning to expand, what countries are you looking at?
Okay, yeah, that's an interesting question. I think we've already started expanding our product offering to our neighboring countries in the sub-Saharan Africa, specifically in Namibia and Botswana. But yes, our immediate plans would be to test the vehicle for European homologation, which is the legal requirement for Europe. That, however, would enable us to legally sell our vehicle and operate our vehicle internationally. So that test is scheduled to be conducted in end of May in Spain. And I think then we'll start aggressively looking at some foreign markets. Key markets for us specifically would be the Netherlands, Belgium, Germany, and some of the bigger African nations. There you're obviously thinking of Nigeria, Kenya, and Uganda, which is, I think, very addressable markets for us. E-commerce is growing significantly in those markets, and we fall in that last mile gap very beautifully where traditional motorcycles and three-wheelers would have been, we slot in quite well.
All right, fantastic. So I look forward to when you expand to Nigeria. I can't wait. Right.
I look forward to seeing Nigeria. I've actually never been there, so.
Yeah. You should totally, and hopefully when you do decide to come to Nigeria, tell me. I'll probably be happy to invest in the company.
Cool. I'll definitely keep you in mind.
Let me take you to another question that's very personal to me, right? So the African continent has a fast growing population, and we have a rapid urbanization issue, right? People moving into cities. Lagos has a population of about 21 million people. Kinshasa has a population of about 11.8 million. You know, Giza up on 8.8, and it keeps growing, right? I think currently it's growing. It's projected to reach 60% growth rate by 2050, according to the UN. And people are moving into the cities very rapidly. Absolutely. Now, what that means is that there's a high demand for mobility and transport systems that don't put a strain on the cities, but at the same time are environmentally friendly.
Absolutely.
Now, MellowVans already does that, right? But the question I'm asking is, you are a battery-powered, low-cost, emissions-free vehicle. But currently, you're focused on e-commerce companies. Is there a reason you're not trying to move into personal use? Because I want to use a MellowVan to go to work, right? So is there a reason you're not thinking about personal use here, or is that a future plan?
There definitely is a future plan. I think we had a sit down about 2 years ago, and we basically narrowed it down, and we had to choose between doing either cargo or personal mobility or both of them. And the decision was made that cargo and last mile transport definitely was the lowest hanging fruit. And we focused all of our energy into building this one specific product and getting it completely right. However, our platform really allows different options, specifically human transport and everything that kind of could be added onto a platform like that is completely possible with what is now called the electric vehicle skateboard type of system, where you have everything is built into the chassis and you can fit whatever type of shell application onto the same skateboard chassis with relative ease. So to answer your question, I think, yes, Africa is urbanizing like never before. We're urbanizing even faster than the Chinese and the Russians are. So our cities will need to start catching up in terms of local energy, local transport. Fuel shortages has been a problem that's dogged African cities for many, many years. So I think if we just take the argument that electricity is a local energy source, then the argument for electric vehicles is obviously a super valid one. MellowVans also, I think, is one role player in the bigger EV section. If we start thinking about what difference could electric buses and electric motorcycles and even things like small electric tractors do for the African continent, then we're really talking significant change and things that could have an impact on the general commuter and the farmer and the entrepreneur. So I think it's quite exciting to look at what's happening in Africa and being proactive about it.
Great. So I'll follow up on that a bit, right? So given how fast the population is growing and also the rise of the middle class in Africa, right? What do you think that space, the light urban mobility space, is going to look like in Africa in the next decade, right? Do you think the hype will match the reality? Do you think we're too excited about it? Do you think we should be more excited? Do you think we should be less excited? Should we be more practical? What do you think about the space on the continent? You know, the light mobility, light urban mobility space in the continent over the next decade?
Yeah, I think already stats and the figures are talking to us. Africa is the biggest growth market for motorcycles, two-wheeler motorcycles, and three-wheeler motorcycles in the world already. Fuel or internal combustion engine motorcycles. So if you take those type of figures and you combine it with inputs and investments from the right companies, and we were talking about setting up facilities, setting up factories, businesses like us that actually build things locally for the local market, there's some real interesting hype then. again, battery technology is catching up very quickly. We're reaching a level where we're seeing almost 10% improvements in energy density on a year-on-year basis. So eventually, I think price parity with a fuel-driven vehicle will be a couple of years away. And the moment we reach price parity with internal combustion engines, then you're going to see mass adoption of electric vehicle applications. And that's going to be super cool for Africa, where you can imagine quiet streets, electric motorcycles, low-cost electric motorcycles, electric buses also play a massive role. And I think that's something that's around the corner from us. And one last thought, I don't really see the Tesla market being super applicable in South Africa or in Africa. Teslas are cool, but they're expensive, and that's the reality. In South Africa, if you compare Tesla, it's Maserati type money. So no disrespect to them, but I think the sweet spot for Africa would be more practical, more realistic quality vehicles.
Fantastic. So I'm going to detour a bit and ask you a very interesting question. Are you taking a bet on electric cars for the world? How long do you think it will take from now for us to have a massive saturation of electric vehicles around the world? What's your bet? 5 years, 10 years, 15 years?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think if I was a betting man, I'd say public transport vehicles is closer than we think. That's a 5 to 10 year cycle where we're going to see mass adoption of electric public transport. Obviously, buses, minibus taxis, that type of thing will lead the way. And then you're going to look at your boda type of scenarios as well. Perfect candidates for electrification. You can plan for it. It can be government subsidized. So that's a given. Mass adoption of electric vehicles for personal use is a different story. I'd love to see it tomorrow.
You're betting on it.
yeah, but it's going to take some time and some very interesting marketing scenarios. I mean, I guess most people, as an example, my father still prefers the purr of a V8 engine.
You should tell your dad to take a bet on the company that your son is building. But all right, and just stretching that a bit more, right? So in telecoms, right, Africa as a continent jumped from almost having no telecommunication to mobile phones.
Absolutely.
Right? Do you think we're going to have the same thing with cars, right? Do you think so there are two sides. People think, oh, at some point, electric cars are going to be global and it's going to take a while to catch up in Africa. Do you think it's going to be the other way around, where Africa is just going to leapfrog in mobility, or do you think it's still going to be gradual the same way?
Absolutely. I think the key word there is specifically mobility. I'd love to see Africa leapfrog from where we're now to a space where we have dependable quality public transport, firstly. And there's a couple of examples where we're seeing really interesting scenarios, like the old school city tram, which is an electric tram running on tracks. It's basic, it's light railway, and that could be solutions that could be implemented very quickly at a relatively affordable cost. So public transport, I think, is something that we really can leapfrog from where we're now to quality public transport. And yes, I think the way the economies are growing, people are looking for their own transport. The humble motorcycle in electric form will definitely play a role going forward.
Fantastic. Now, your company, MellowVans, was featured in Forbes as one of the 7 most innovative companies in Africa. Now, tell me, how do you think around the innovation process? How do you innovate as a person? How was your process for innovation? And 2, how do you, in your company, ensure that there's a spirit of innovation? What's your process for that? What advice would you give a startup founder that came up to you and said, I'm trying to build an innovative startup. I want to ensure that we can maintain the culture of innovation in my company?
Wow, that's a super question. And I'm not exactly sure how to answer that.
We'll take anyone.
Yeah. There's a few ways of thinking about it. I think firstly, in our specific case, we're lucky enough to have access to some super smart young people. There's a very big university around the corner from us. So we have a natural influx of young people coming into the company with new ideas, with solid engineering principles behind them, and just having open discussions on everything and allowing discussions like what role would crypto play going forward in mobility is obviously a big thing. And I guess, yeah, just having those open platforms is massive, with young people playing a role, having them, allowing their voices to be heard.
Fantastic. So you said three things that I'm going to keep in mind. One, a pipeline of talent, having young people keep moving in. Two, you said competence, a basic understanding of the guiding principles. And you said three, open conversations, being able to ensure that conversations can happen. I love that. Now I'm going to jump a question that you brought up. Maybe you didn't know when you brought it up, but I'll throw it back to you. What role will crypto play in mobility, right? Tesla has said that they're considering, Tesla's taking an investment in cryptocurrency. And I said that they are also thinking of receiving payments in crypto, in Bitcoins for Tesla cars in the future. What role do you think that will play? Is MellowVans considering taking Bitcoins for MellowVans in the future?
Yeah, that's a good question. Just for interest sake also, I know big entities like the World Economic Forum has now specifically created think tanks to think about what role could crypto in the bigger sense play in all forms of mobility. It's not only last mile mobility or urban mobility, but in larger mobility, transport of goods from harbors, that type of thing. So there's no easy way to answer this question. I think my personal opinion would be it's going to become part of daily life very, very soon. And again, that's an opportunity for Africa to leapfrog certain.
I think we're thriving in that one, right? Some of our markets are already the leading markets in crypto transactions globally. Nigeria is number two. Yeah. Yes. So I'll jump to the next question, all right? So building something like what you're building, which involves a bridge of what the whole looks like and the new, and trying to find what the future looks like, which is what MellowVans is doing, right? You're designing the future by trying to take mobility that's already existed and bringing it into the future for electric mobility, but at the same time thinking of the contextual base of Africa, right? It means you have to work with other companies. It means you have to forge partnerships. So I'll ask a question. What are your guiding principles when forging partnerships? And what do you look for in the businesses you plan to do business with? Like what principles guide you in picking the people you partner with?
Well, that's big. I think for us, it's critical to choose the right partners, especially for any startup going from the startup phase to the scale phase. Those initial, say, cornerstone partners that you choose absolutely has to be ethical, has to be straightforward, has to have the same ambitions that you hold for your company. So it's ethics, ambitions, and I think larger aspirations. No entrepreneur should still be thinking of their immediate environment. Everybody should start thinking of scale, scale, scale. So the combination of those things, I think, is a key component for us.
Fantastic. I love how you said that. Scale, scale, scale. I love that. And the truth is, for the continent, we need more of that. We need more interconnectivity. We need more scale. We need more expansions. And that's why one of the things that I'm very passionate about is helping businesses scale, right? Helping them expand across the continent, right? Advising them on how to move their businesses from one country to another country, because it's just an important part for us as a continent. Scale, 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 like you said.
Absolutely.
And let me ask you a very interesting question. You've gone backpacking, you do mountain climbing, you do all those interestingly high energy activity. Tell me one thing you're trying to add to the list of crazy things you've done that you haven't done yet.
Something that I'd like to add actually is kite surfing. Kite surfing, yeah. Kite surfing and do dancing lessons.
I didn't see that. That's an interesting balance, but I'll give it to her. Dancing lessons. We'll look forward to seeing the video of that soon.
Soon enough, I'll be doing a cha-cha for you.
Great. So I ask a question. What makes you feel most fulfilled about your job? When you're not running MellowVans or doing those interestingly high energy activities, what do you do to unwind, right? What do you do to relax? And what about your job gets you most excited?
Yeah, I'll start by answering that question. I think, and I just had the discussion this morning also with somebody, is firstly, having a social impact or impact on the people around you. We've created jobs for people. We've set up and trained people that's gone from very basic, almost cleaner type level to people becoming technicians and electric technicians. So there's a big story to be told on social impact for entrepreneurs. If you create a job in Africa, you're looking after not only one person, but you're looking after a family. And that already says quite a lot. And that makes me proud. And then to answer your second question, to unwind, I've got 3 sons. So yeah, just play something as basic as just kicking a ball with a boy is the most relaxing thing that I think a human or a man can do. And then obviously, if you do have the opportunity, going fishing with somebody, and especially going fishing with, in my case, with my son, is super relaxing.
That's amazing. It's amazing. So let me ask a question. How do you obviously have a very intense life, right? How do you attain balance? How do you balance out your work with your social life, with your family? Like how do you strive for balance? What does that look like? And I say that just thinking of a young entrepreneur who's trying to build up something, who's throwing all his energy into building out something life-changing. What is balance? How do you achieve balance in all of that?
Yeah, again, that's a super good question. I think balance starts by setting very specific boundaries, time boundaries, firstly, where you have to cut off at a certain stage and say you're walking out of the office at 5 p.m. or whatever the case may be. And then you have to leave work behind you. Otherwise, you're going to end up working till 9, 10, or even later. And then the line and the balance between work and personal life and your family is going to become really, really blurred. And then eventually, over the short term, that's fine. But long term, that has a very negative knock-on effect where something will have to give eventually.
That's interesting. Thanks for that. I'll keep that in mind. Leaving the work at 5. I'll make mine 8, but I'll try.
Well, it depends. If you don't have a family or kids, then
Great. So I'll ask a question. What when you think about the future of Africa and the world, what is one technology that you're willing to take a bet on, right? And what is one product you're surprised has not been built yet?
Oh, that's easy to answer. And I just thought about it over the weekend. I think there's a lot to be said for new forms of protein. And that involves anything from insect protein, alternative plant-based proteins, and new food sources. I think should have been further along the line and should have achieved more public adaptation and obviously large scale kind of adoption in the markets, because we cannot keep on depending on animal-based proteins indefinitely. We'll have to start thinking of a more balanced type of diet for global citizens, from anyone in Africa to people in New York. Eventually, something will have to give in terms of food and food production.
Thank you. That's very remarkable, right? You would think that now we're going to the moon. You would think that we would have figured that out, right? But no, we want to go to the moon first.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, we've gone to the moon, but we're still not feeding our people.
Exactly, right? You know,
Yeah.
Priorities, humans, priorities.
Exactly. And we should have done this years ago. But no.
Fantastic. The last question I want to ask you, so we can close out of this conversation, is this: if you had to do all this again, you had to give yourself an advice, right? A younger version of yourself, a 25-year-old version of yourself, what advice would you have given yourself?
Well, that's really interesting. I think, of course, all the cliches, believe in yourself, that's super valid. Finding the right team, again, really good. Work in a corporate before you go work in a startup, again, super important. And I guess having a balance of legal requirements as a startup would be really good.
Hi here.
Absolutely. So get the right lawyer or do a short course in your specific country's legal requirements. Any business has very specific legal requirements in terms of setting yourself up for a due diligence a year down the line. Having all the right ticks and balances on board will always help you. So just having that basic knowledge of legal requirements and business ethics as well really sets you on the right standard to grow the business.
Fantastic. I know I said that was the last question, but sorry, two things popped in my head.
No worries.
One of them is this, right? So there's a big debate going on in the startup community, and the debate is in the US and in most of Europe, people focus businesses for hyper growth. So the idea is grow as fast as possible, acquire customers by all means possible. On the other hand, because of the constraints of the middle class and the revenue markets in Africa, there have been arguments to say, rather than building for hyper growth in Africa, build first for revenue. What position are you? Are you for a startup? Should a startup focus more on revenue or should it focus more on growth?
Yeah, I think revenue is king at the moment. As an African, the way Americans see the rock star type of scenario in terms of startups, that's great and it works for them. It really does. And the same, there's a very, very different mentality on how people and the public sees startups and investors see startups as well. But I guess locally on the home front, what matters is your bottom line. And if you're paying salaries and if you have a product that's actually writing invoices and making money and people are using it, that changes the entire scenario. And personally, I think for the better.
Fantastic. Another question I'd ask you is, did you ever have times when you were growing your business, right, where you had revenue issues, right, where you were cash trapped or you couldn't pay the bills or you couldn't figure that out? How did you navigate that, right? And what's your advice for people that are going through that and trying to build that at the earliest stage of their business, bootstrapping and all that?
Yeah. Well, initially, I used to drink too much whiskey to kind of just come through.
And Stellenbosch has the best wine, so yes,
yeah.
Go on.
Yeah, wine, whiskey, beer. Yeah, so yes, those times are tough. And every business will go through stages where you're not sure where tomorrow's salary run will come from. And there were times where we did pay salaries late. And that again speaks to the type of people that you have to have in your team that understand that it's risky business being a startup. There's no real guarantees like you'd have in a corporate. But yeah, just keep on fighting, keep on chipping away day by day. And success is not an overnight thing. It's never overnight. It's a compound effect of working on something with a quality team day by day, chipping away. And then eventually success is a factor of all of those compounded actions.
All right. So next question I'll ask you quickly. Investors, investment and investors. What has been your principle around engaging with investors, getting investments, right? What has been your biggest lessons from that process, particularly in the African context?
Yeah, interesting. I think now after having dealt with several investors and having raised a few rounds, something that's really become clear is again that investors look for legal checks. Everything needs to be in place. So that speaks again to getting the right lawyer, getting your IP protected as well, super important. So those type of things, the moment a due diligence is put in front of you and you can't answer questions, that investor will walk away. So super important having the basic knowledge of what's needed for institutionalized investors or even angels. No angel will invest in something that they have doubts in terms of ethics or bookkeeping or whatever the case may be. So it's super important.
Fantastic. And what's the role of, and what's your position about MVP, right? So in Raisin, right, are you one of those who feel strongly that we should have an MVP before you go to market? Or are you a person who says, listen, once you have a good enough idea, you've proven it, you can go to market? What's your general view around Raisin at the earliest stage?
Yeah, now I think you need an MVP. But a few years ago, I was all for solid ideas and almost selling a dream to somebody. And there are investors that would buy a dream. But I think if you do have a solid product and you have that MVP on the ground, that immediately changes your investment scenario very quickly. And I guess also investments are thematic. If I had to specifically advise somebody on looking for investors, look for the investor that has the appetite for what you're working on. And I think going forward, that's going to become more relevant with VCs focusing on specific industries with specific knowledge.
Fantastic.
There's going to be main themes there: education tech, health tech, smart cities. You name what you're focused on. I think there's going to be very clear emphasis on these themes.
Fantastic. Just a quick question by the side. Do you invest also, or do you invest in startups yet or not?
Not yet. I'm quite interested at the moment in looking at a few startups. We obviously get interesting proposals every now and again. So right now we're considering looking at some investments in the agriculture space, weirdly, which I think is something that's also due for a bit of a shake-up with the technology that we're seeing becoming available in agriculture.
All right.
But yeah, I think that there's a few interesting opportunities coming along.
Fantastic. Yeah. You should check out our platform. You should check, and I look forward to seeing you play. I find that some of the best investors on the continent will be those who have built interesting things themselves, because they're not just bringing capital, they're also bringing experience about how to build. The last question I'll ask you, and this is generally my last question: innovation and regulators, right? One of the problems is generally that a number of times regulators either don't understand your innovation, or the regulation doesn't exist for your regulation, for your innovation yet. As someone who's building an innovative startup, which is what you build, how do you navigate dealing with regulators, right? Dealing with regulators that are either too bullish, or will just truncating innovation, or where there's no even regulation at all?
That's a solid question. I think specifically for us, keep in mind we're building technically a vehicle that conforms to a whole set of regulations just on the safety and quality side. And then obviously building something that should not only work in Africa, but theoretically we want to expand into Europe and other markets as well. Where regulation is something that you cannot, there's no grow areas in automotive. You have to sit down, and whatever you're planning, whatever you're building, you have to be cognizant of those regulations and build around them. I think the days of arguing with regulators, for us specifically, is long gone. I'd much rather be of the point where you conform, and you make sure you conform well to a set of regulations, than try to find a gray area or an argument that you want to take and fight with somebody.
Fantastic. All right, I think I'm going to close out here. Any last words, any last statements, anything you want to say? And thanks for that work around regulators. I'm going to keep that in mind. As someone who works regulators every other day. But any last words, anything you want to say before we close out on this conversation?
Tola, thank you very much. I really appreciate it. I look forward to meeting you in Nigeria soon enough.
Definitely, and I come to South Africa pretty often. So definitely, when I'm in South Africa, we must catch a whiskey.
Absolutely. Please look me up. I've got a bottle waiting for you.
Definitely, I'll reach out.
Thank you.
All right, thank you so much, and for everyone who's come on, thank you so much. This is Innovation Law Club Africa. Check us out on all our platforms. Thank you so much, everyone.
Brilliant.
Thank you so much, Neil the Press, for coming.
All the best. Thanks. Cheers. Bye-bye.
Bye.